morning. I'm Amy Tipton. I'm the Assistant Director of the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens, and I'm here with you today in the VanLandingham Glen, which is our woodland garden, which highlights a lot of our native plants. This is the area that I've been in for the last 2 Saturdays, and it keeps providing more material for us to discuss every week. So as promised, this week we're going to be talking about monocots, and I wanted to give you a short little hike through the glen down to an area where we have lots of wildflowers, including several representatives from the monocots. And as we go, we'll talk a little bit about the different characteristics of monocots versus dicots, and some of our native representatives of that group. So starting out this morning, you see we have a little bed of Iris cristata. Iris cristata is in the iris family, just like our German bearded iris or your Siberian or Japanese iris, Dutch iris that you might have in your garden. This, like the ginger that I talked about and that you see here in the middle, in prior weeks, is a good ground cover. It provides this nice pointy-leaved spray that creeps along and fills in an area quite nicely. If you look at the iris from the top, you'll see that the iris is in parts of 3. The flower is in parts of 3. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And if you concentrate on the leaf, you notice that the venation, the veins that conduct the materials for the plant, water and food and such, the veins are parallel. As you can see, our rhododendrons are still on a wonderful display in the gardens right now. Here we have a beautiful fringe tree. Let's get close to the fringe tree. Fringe tree is a dicot. It's a shrub to small tree, but it's beautiful, so I wanted to share that with you. Okay, as we walk down the path into the VanLandingham Glen, you see that the color is ablaze with the rhododendron and other spring flowers. Here we have one of our deciduous azaleas. Oh, it caught a whiff of that. Oh, it's lovely. Smells like walking in a florist shop minus the chemicals. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between monocots and dicots. There are a few differences in the two. Remember the first week that we talked about the buttercup family. Buttercups are one of the earliest dicot families to evolve. And then we talked about the basal angiosperms, which have characteristics of both dicots and monocots. Here on the left, you see a dicot leaf and a dicot seedling. And on the right, you see a monocot leaf. So if we look carefully at the dicot leaf, you see that the venation branches, and then it branches again, and then it branches again. That is typical of all dicots. And then if you look at the little seedling, you notice that emerging from what was the original seed are 2 leaflets, These are called seed leaves. And then in the center, you see the true leaf, or an indication of what the adult leaves will look like. The seed leaves typically look very different from the true leaves. But here you see two seed leaves. I wasn't able to get a monocot seedling, but if I did, you would only see one of those seed leaves. And here is the monocot venation, very parallel, all the way to the edge of the leaf. Okay. Another difference between monocots and dicots involves the floral structure. So here I've dissected a monocot. This is a lily. And you'll notice that the sepals, which are the outer whorl of floral parts, and the petals look very similar. If you think about your stargazer lilies or tiger lilies, daylilies, those types of things, oftentimes that's the case. The inner whorl of petals is not terribly different from the outer whorl of sepals, but they do occur in different places on the flower. Then you see the stamens, which is the male reproductive part, along with pollen-bearing anthers. And then the pistil, and if we look closely at the end of the pistil, you see that the stigma has three parts. It's split into three. Three-parted stigma, 6 stamens, 3 petals, and 3 sepals. That series of multiples of 3 is indicative of monocots. And those are the groups we'll be talking about specifically today. Okay. Many of the plants we'll look at today are going to be trilliums, but I did want to introduce you to such things as the iris and this little beauty. This is the Virginia spiderwort. Notice the 3 petals. And behind it, in the bud, there are 3 sepals that are covering and protecting those petals for the new flower. This is also called dayflower. Similar to daylilies, the flower lasts for 1 day, and then it's replaced by other flowers. Here you can see some of the past flowers that are dangling, and the oncoming flowers that are budded and above the current flower. One of the beautiful things about the dayflower is the fringed stamens. I'm having a difficulty finding a good, there you go. So you can see the filament of the stamen is very fluffy. That's an interesting characteristic of this particular plant. Notice the venation here is also parallel, like the rest of our monocots. It looks almost grass-like in this particular plant. Well, there's a reason for that. Grasses are also monocots. Grasses and corn is a type of grass, bamboo is a type of grass. They are monocots. Here we have an example of a trillium. Wanted to show you. So there are about 35 species of trillium in the southeast and northeastern portions of the U.S. In North Carolina, we have about 15 native species. The remainder of the species are spread amongst the northwestern part of North America. and also in Eastern Asia. But our diversity in North Carolina is really quite amazing. And here in this Trillium discolor, or small yellow trillium, you can see 3 creamy yellow petals. Behind that, a triad of green sepals, and then 3 leafy structures. We typically refer to these as leaves, although they are actually modified bracts of the flower. Amongst the diversity of the trilliums, you can identify them based on a few major characters, or at least get them into groups based on these characters. The characters include whether or not the flowers are born on a stem above those leafy bracts, or if they're born directly on the leafy bracts. So I want to find some examples of each of those. Okay, so the Trillium discolor, or the small yellow trillium, you noticed that the petals were sitting on top of the leaves. We'll just call them leaves for short. However, in this trillium, you notice that it has a long stem or pedicel going to the flower to raise it above the leaves. That is one of the main differentiating characteristics between the different groups of trillium, whether or not they have that stem. Sometimes it will have certain species will have stems that don't raise the flower above the leaves, but allow it to dangle underneath of the leaves. This creamy white beauty is Trillium flexipes. And here right next to it we have a beautiful little grouping of another type of monocot. This is a monocot that is in the arum family. This is also native. This is called Jack in the Pulpit. It's called Jack in the Pulpit because part of the flowering structure is this spadix here, which is like a little person inside of this spathe. So Jack is in his pulpit. And the flowers, this is an inflorescence, or a group of flowers. The flowers are actually inside of the spathe at the bottom of the spadix, and it will have both male and female flowers along that structure. You might remember last week I talked about the way that some of our native wildflowers are dispersed. The seeds are dispersed into groups by ants. Well, you can see here that that is the case. We have many individual plants of Jack in the Pulpit here, all gathered in what was once an ant midden. Now you'll notice with the Jack in the Pulpit leaves that they are somewhat in between the look of a true pure monocot leaf and a dicot leaf. But these are monocots. And this plant is actually related to another arum which is famous at the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens, and that is the Titan arum, which can grow to be up to 12 feet tall, and I'm speaking of the flower itself, the flowering structure, the inflorescence. So stay posted. We might have some more information about our Titan arum in the near future. Here we have Mayaples, another spring plant. Mayaples are dicots. The flowers, when pollinated, will turn into little apple-like structures. They will swell into about the size of a small lime, like a key lime. And they're held at a height perfect for box turtles to browse on. They're a favorite of box turtles, which we actually have quite a few box turtles here that reside in the glen. Here in the distance you see another Trillium flexipes. We have some blue phacelia, purple phacelia, bleeding heart, both of which are dicots. Here's a different species of Trillium. Notice that the flowers are borne on top of the leaves, so they are what is called sessile, so without a pedicel, and this is called Sweet Little Betsy. They're practically glowing in the sun. So you can see 1, 2, 3 leaves. 1, 2, 3 green sepals. And look at those beautiful maroon petals, 3 of those as well. And here's another one of those. Other ways in which the Trillium are split into groups, other than whether or not they have a stalk or a pedicel, includes what color the ovary is. So when the female structure, the pistil, is pollinated, it turns into a fruit, and that fruit color helps determine what group of Trillium you're looking at. If the Trillium ovary is creamy white, that puts it into one group, such as the flexipes, whereas the Trillium that have the burgundy ovary that puts it into a different group, such as Trillium erectum. So, as I mentioned before, we have about 15 species of Trillium in North Carolina and about 45 species altogether throughout the world. Within the sessile group, we have several species. The ones with a dot or a bullet, those are native to North Carolina, and the ones in parentheses are native to the southeast outside of North Carolina. And there are pictures of many of these in a folder within this Facebook feed for you to look at, and they're identified for you. So all of these have flowers that are borne directly on the leaves. And these species have a stalk. So Trillium grandiflorum, the great white trillium, is borne above the flowers on a stalk. And then we have some that are borne underneath of the leaves, such as Trillium vasii. And then we have Trillium sulcatum, which has a nodding flower borne sometimes above, sometimes below the leaves. In addition to the trillium, we have other species that you'll see in the photos of monocots in our native woodland flora, including the trout lily. We have some orchids. Also, orchids are monocots. Orchids are actually the most diverse family of flowering plants. So please send questions. I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. And I've enjoyed spending Saturdays with you. I hope that you've enjoyed it as well. And I hope to see you at the gardens very soon when everything is lifted and we're able to enjoy each other's company again. Take care.